Hey everyone, this is Dr. K. I have a brave mom who has inspired me so much here to share her story. And this is a story that I think every parent whose child has any struggles needs to hear. Any provider who takes care of these children needs to hear, because this is an experience that I hope no parent ever has to go through. And if your child is struggling, the message that Jordan, this amazing mom who's also a healthcare provider, has to share is something everyone needs to pay attention to. So, with that, Jordan, please share that awful moment where you saw this beautiful little girl change, and let's go from there.
Totally. Thank you for the opportunity. My daughter was newly 3 and had a long history of illnesses, but had just been coming off of a couple weeks of being sick, but we thought nothing of it. Woke up one day from a nap like any other day, and her speech was slurred from baseline. But again, kids can be odd sometimes, so we didn't think too much of it. And the next day was really, we would call it like the onset of everything, where she woke up a totally different child. She was like staring off into space. She was doing this rocking motion. We couldn't get her attention. Her little neighborhood buddies came over to play, and she was sitting off on a sidewall, just almost like catatonically rocking. Her favorite foods, she started spitting out, throwing in the floor. She stopped wearing clothes. We tried to take her to run errands, and she was just looked skittish and scared. And it continued to devolve from there, but undeniably, there was an overnight change that really affected her systemically. Sleep, eating, everything. She was not my same kid. And I have all these videos from those couple days because I was somewhat in shock that a regression could happen so quickly.
I'm sorry. It must have been the most god awful moment of your entire life.
It was. I was a few weeks postpartum, and just trying to wrap my head around. I remember just like every night, right, I would leave her room after bedtime and I would just sob, and I would go out and I would say, "Where is she? Like, where is my little girl? Like, she's gone, and what is happening?"
I'm sorry. I'm
Thank you.
sorry. I would love for us to expand on some of the things you touched on because I mean the change that she had, she went from being a social, happy little girl who had some issues that which we'll touch on to really struggling. So people
Totally.
that she would interact with, she now was scared of. Baths that she was okay with, she was no longer tolerating. Foods that she was willing to eat, she's no longer tolerating. Give us a little bit more of a detailed picture of that change that you saw in her.
Absolutely. So, like you said, she wasn't without issues. We had I would say she was a more difficult baby, but I was definitely not like seeking therapy, for instance. Like we were able to do daily life baths, like you said, and getting dressed and leaving the house. I mean, this was a child that was, you know, Tuesdays at story time at the library, Wednesdays at music class. We were going to ballet, like doing all of the things. She had all of her friends, play buddies. I mean, she was the people at the grocery store knew her by name. Like she was very social. Not without sensory issues, to be sure, but nothing like this. And it was like overnight, the dial got just turned up on high for all of any, small things that you may have noticed before. And like, I remember I would just be sitting in her floor trying to get her dressed for the day. Like, what is happening? I mean, it was like trying to dress a caged animal. And she was aggressive, violent, and like this was a child that had barely had meltdowns. I would say for a 2-year old, she, had been a fairly regulated kiddo. And eating, I mean, everything, she all but stopped eating. My background is a feeding therapist, and so I am sitting here like I have broken my child. What is happening? I mean, we could not get her to eat, sleeping. I mean, she basically just stopped like all basic life skills. Brushing teeth was a battle. I mean, there was no part of our day that I wasn't taking a big inhale to go enter into. Um, and again, this was not my child at all.
She also developed facial tics,
Hmm.
other
Overnight. facial, like I have a video of it with the slurred speech where this facial tic began, and it would come and go, stutter that would come and go. She like multiple neurological symptoms. She would reach her hand out to like grab her milk cup sometimes in her hand. It looked like a Parkinson's patient, like her hand would be tremoring. Sometimes she would just go to like walk up the stairs and she couldn't do it. She would just like stop and be like, carry me. She would go to run and at times could, and then others couldn't. Like nothing, but again, no issues that we had seen prior to that. We even started occupational therapy, and we all just kind of sat around scratching our heads. She wasn't responsive to therapy. If anything, it got worse as time progressed. Um, I'm trying to think of I mean, there were so many new onset things like a tremendous amount of anxiety, fear leaving the house, wouldn't leave the couch. Again, this is a child that maybe watched 30 minutes of screen time every now and again, who just basically all she had the energy and capability to do was sit on the couch and like catatonically watch TV.
Hmm. Because so she was exhausted, and one of the things that I remember us talking about is she was also like walking like she was drunk, and that was not the case before.
And no, and I mean, none of the she presented like a pretty typical toddler, but she looked drunk sometimes, and it would vacillate in between this like yeah this like drunken stupor and then rage and then just like lethargy. She just looked I remember somebody saying if I had walked in the room and you told me this was like a kid on chemo or something like that, I would have been like, yeah, that checks out, like that looks like what's happening here. I mean, her eyes just looked like sunken in, like dark circles. I mean, she just looked sick, and it was.
Yeah, it saddens my heart to hear this even now. And no one believed you. No one like I mean, you're a healthcare professional. You talk to other providers, and sadly, your medical community was just kind of shrugging their shoulder.
I think that's like probably the hardest part looking back on, and I have as someone in healthcare, I have so much like grace for the limitations there and all of the things. However, yes, like I went in and point blank was portraying all of this, and I will never forget being told, you know, she's a new sister, she's struggling to adjust. We are not exploring this any further. And I went home to that afternoon. I remember the equivalent of like a caged animal, and I was just at a loss. And I wish you could like see my Google search history at that point in time, because it felt like, okay, this is all on me to figure out, because no one's listening and no one's believing me.
I'm sorry. I'm
Yeah.
sorry. You know, the sad thing is what you're describing to the T is basically what I see in so many of my patients. And if we're to distill it down, that this is what Dr. Shoemaker called biotoxin illness in children,
Yes.
literally to the T. So the aggression, the anxiety, that's all neuroinflammation. The walking drunk is histamine and inflammation disrupting the vestibular system, which is causing, loss of balance. The biotoxins disrupt the mitochondria, which causes all of the fatigue. And, sadly, these are things that very few people pay attention to, including a lot of wonderful providers, because these are conversations that are not shared in a lot of medical circles. They're
Mhm.
not discussed in conferences, even integrative conferences.
Mhm.
And part of why I thought the story that you had to share was so powerful is because of how pronounced of you know, a presentation she had.
Mhm.
Now, let's fast forward to what did you guys find in the home? And would you mind sharing pictures of what you found?
Absolutely. I can send or show
Oh,
either
yeah.
way. So we it was really because of providers like you who, again, backing up as a healthcare provider, pediatric healthcare provider, I started treating this just as autism. Like what else in my book, presented like this overnight regression. I knew of nothing else. And then as I'm digging, because we're unresponsive to therapy, we're continuing to decline in a way that I had never seen such a rapid unraveling with autism. So I started looking into other things, and I stumbled across your content and other similarly minded providers. And it was like this aha moment. I remember staying awake all night one night, listening to podcasts and reading, just crying. And I was like, I think I've missed this. Like something is wrong. So retrospectively, we do a mycotoxin test. Her levels are through the roof. We had never considered mold as a possibility. So then we start looking into mold. And we had an assessment done in our house. I'm going to pull up photos. And the levels were high in the air. And so we started the remediation process. Well, during that, they did what they knew to do. Suspect wall that I am not feeling great about. Could you please look behind it? They scoped it, and there was just a massive colony of mold from what appeared to be water damage from during a previous owner's time. I don't know if you can see this very well, but they ended up, this is like behind the wall in our living room, and they ended up taking out the sheetrock all basically in half of the living room. It was covered with mold, impacting the walls on the other side as well, including our, hall closet and the pantry and cabinets. I mean, it was in the crawl space. Our HVAC was riddled with it. I mean, it was in the hall closet lining the wall to her bedroom. I mean, pretty much impacting not, every room in the house almost, but most certainly the air quality in the house. I mean, this was not a small scale issue. And again, if you walked into our house, nothing would have led you to believe that. And even with really good mold remediators, if I hadn't said, like, can you just look behind that wall, it would have been missed. And if it wasn't for providers like you who had been letting me know that this was even a possibility, no one had mentioned it. And I would have been calling this an autistic developmental regression, and she would have remained sick without help. And even beyond that, no one was even taking me seriously before, like, we sought OT without a referral, even.
What, so you guys moved. I think this is now the next important part of this. So you guys moved out of that house and you're in a home that we actually know has a little bit mold, but less. What have
Mhm.
you seen since you guys moved? So it's been what, a month and a half now?
A month and a half. And I think that if you had told me when we first found out that our house had mold in it, it felt very dramatic almost maybe to pick up and move. And I read stories of families doing that. If I had it to do over again, I would have done it the day I found it, because what we saw happen with her was I will never forget, like the day that we went over to, out of our space, rage. I mean, violent, horrid. If she was not on the couch watching TV, she was raging. Within the next 2 weeks, she had been waking up, prior to this for 3 to 4 hours every single night. She slept through the night every single night. We went from her not, I couldn't remember the last time she had like left the house. We went to the house, or we went to Target together, and I remember driving there being like, this is utopia. Like we are out of the house and doing something. I mean, again, it wasn't this like complete reversal, but I mean, undeniable changes where we were sitting on the floor and playing together. And again, that was only from getting out of that physical space.
In within a few weeks.
I mean, completely. And then it's continued to improve over time, of course, but it was undeniable, the change that had happened. And um, as a mom, you carry the weight of knowing, even if no one is taking you seriously, that's your child, and no matter how dramatic it seems. And to this day, I still have families or providers or people, mold, like it's not well received often,
Yeah.
but it's real. It is
Yeah.
so real. And if I had not found people like you who gave me the courage to believe it and do something different, who knows where I know where she would be, and it would be sad and scary.
Yeah, and then that's the part that makes me really sad because I can't even begin to imagine how many kids are in the same boat. 30% of homes in the U.S. have mold, so that this isn't like a uncommon rare situation. And sadly, outside of therapy, the only other things we can do is prescribe medications. And if a child is violent, we put them on anxiolytics. If that doesn't work, we put them on antipsychotics, and that's the part that makes me so sad. But
Mhm.
I love, this message of hope because within a few weeks, her energy came back.
Oh, yes, like we were, I mean, at parks, playing, going on hikes, over the last couple of weeks, like things that we never could have done before. And again, not a total, like, we're not completely back to baseline, but if you had told me that making the change that we did of getting out of the house would have had her energy levels, mood, emotional regulation, the sensory experiences, I don't think I would have believed you that it could have affected all of those things, but it has, and it's real. And it's undeniable.
Hmm. Good. So when you say sensory experiences, she was able to take baths again. She was
Mhm.
able to be in the world. She wasn't getting overwhelmed to the same extent, right?
And even if she was, it was like giving regulation bandwidth back. Like, and again, nothing else had changed. So, like, even if she was getting overwhelmed, she could verbalize instead of screaming without your awareness. She could verbatim tell you. That was another big change that I don't know that I mentioned was her speech changed.
Hmm.
I mean, like the sentence length. Nothing else had changed. And she's putting sentences together in a way that we hadn't heard her do in months, communicating so much more clearly. Um, and and yes, like out in the world, even interacted. I was standing at the park one day crying. She walked up to a little girl and hugged her. She high-fived a grocery bagger at the checkout line. And he was like, not all kids are that friendly. And I just wanted to be like, you have no idea where we've been. Like she would have been screaming and running if I had tried to take her into a store a few weeks prior. So the other thing too, appetite, the ability to eat different foods. Again, not totally back to baseline, but she didn't have an appetite. She wasn't eating. And then getting her out of she began voicing again, like, I'm hungry. I want to eat.
I love it. I love it. And, this is the part that I think is so powerful. When you're in an environment, and the analogy, I don't know if I shared this with you, the analogy that I've come up with is it's like having a child with peanut allergies, pretty severe peanut allergies, and they're living in a home where there's peanut dust and peanut crumbs everywhere.
Mhm.
And if you translate that into what you had seen, right? Those particulates, the microbial compounds were triggering a boatload of inflammation, horrendous amounts of inflammation in this beautiful little girl's system, including her mitochondria.
Mhm.
So the fatigue, the irritability, the lack of appetite, the sleep disturbance, the phobias, the fears, the anxiety, the sensory findings, all of that was the microbial particulates messing up multiple systems that caused this presentation. And I think what is so beautiful about this story is, again, we obviously have a lot more work to do, but just the fact that you guys were able to clean up the environment enough, and again, you guys still have mold where you are, but substantially less.
Mhm.
She is now healing. And that's the most beautiful part of this message in terms of what could be possible if these kids are able to just breathe in clean air that isn't
Mhm.
filled with a host of biotoxins that makes them sick.
And that is the tricky thing about this topic. It's invisible, right? Like um, it, you can't see what's impacting her so much until you take them out of the environment and you realize, well, it's real, even if you can't, exactly see what's circulating through the air. Um, but I will say, as we walked up and we saw the drywall removed and what had been living behind the walls in our living room, unbeknownst to us, for all the years that we've lived there, it is a real thing that has real impacts.
Let's thank you for sharing that.
Of
I
course.
want to rewind back now to the early part of her life because this didn't happen overnight, as you alluded to.
Mhm.
She had a very particular presentation. And I think this is also really, really important because even though her presentation is a little bit more severe than what I typically see, because now we know she has some underlying immunodeficiencies. So she was immunologically more susceptible to this than others. Her presentation is actually very similar to what I see in a lot of kids who everyone thinks is like, oh, well, a little colic is not a big deal. A little ear infection is not a big deal. A little, whatever is not a big deal. Except those were actually the early signs of her being affected by these biotoxins. And
Mhm.
no one made the connection, right? Can you share with us what you saw essentially from early on?
Totally. So, um, again, you alluded to this, but my background is like a pediatric. Like I worked in the NICU, I worked in our air digestive clinic, like with the reflux babies. Like I wasn't unaware that reflux and colic existed, but within like 4 to 6 weeks, I mean, she was basically just screaming nonstop, not sleeping, could not be consoled. She started losing, stopped gaining weight, then began losing weight from the amount of like reflux that she had. She became aversive to feeding. I mean, she just seemed completely dysregulated at all times and in pain, really. And I remember taking her to all these like specialists, and everybody's just like, she's got reflux, she's got colic, and I remember hearing those words being told to families, but until you're living it, I mean, I just kept saying, I was like, this just can't be normal. So, we had the reflux, we had the colic, and I mean, it is all severe. And then around 3 months at the turn of 4, she developed her first ear infection. And, we did antibiotics, went back for an ear check. It had gotten worse. Then we did another round, same thing. We ended up doing 3 or 4 oral antibiotics, then a round of Rocephin shots, and the ear infection would not clear and was just getting worse. Meanwhile, she's basically just sideways that entire month. So they kind of urgently worked her in for a set of ear tubes. And that did help. She didn't get ear infections as frequently,
When
but
did she get the ear tubes? How old was she?
4 months old. Um, I mean, she was so young. And again, that entire month, the ear infection never cleared despite all of those antibiotics and throw layer in that the colic, the reflux, she had stopped. She was exclusively nursing at first, loved it, and then at this point is like aversive to feeding, basically just seems in pain. I had cut out dairy, which did, I would say, make some impact on the aversion and the reflux and whatnot, but nothing. I'm thickening her milk or the pumped milk with gel mix, just trying to get it thicker to keep down. I mean, it was a full-time job taking care of her. And she seemed in pain all the time. And even with the ear tubes, persisted in getting ear infections. And the interesting thing about it looking back, and I remember voicing like, this can't be normal. We would do the ear drops in the tubes, but often it would not respond to the first set of drops. And then, we would do another set and then it would be better, but not perfect. And then they would do an oral antibiotic. I mean, she was just on this merry-go. We lived at the pediatrician's office. We were on a merry-go-round of antibiotics.
And she got what, about 15 antibiotics in the first 2 years or so of life?
At least, at least.
And
Um,
she got injectables too.
Definitely. And still remained unresponsive to them usually. And again, I think the sad part was, and no blame pointing, but I just wish, knowing what I know now, I kept going in being like, is this normal? Like this can't be normal. And I had a professional relationship, like these were my colleagues. So I didn't want to be perceived as being the dramatic mom. So, I wanted to be like, okay, if this is normal, like we'll ride it out. But my gut was just always like, this can't be typical. Um, on top of that, she, began developing croup. And then we were on steroids. And I mean, she would be sick for 3 to 4 month time periods. We weren't talking like, the 10-day vomiting bug would roll into croup, would roll into an ear infection. I mean, it was constant.
And she got several rounds of steroids for croup.
Yes, and we talked about the pattern with her illnesses was this like you would think you had gotten above it and then it would come back. So she would have 1 or 2 good days and then the steroids would stop and then she would just relapse again and it would get worse. Or she would vomit for a few days and then stop and you'd have one day and then it would begin again. And so it just did not follow a very typical pattern. We'd go to the birthday party and everyone else would get the 24-hour bug and it would put her in the ER. And it was very intense.
Sorry.
It was hard. It was hard.
When did she start developing the sensory issues? Obviously, they were milder than when, everything went sideways. But or like at what age did she start having sensory stuff? And it wasn't huge, but nonetheless, you were like, oh, she's more sensitive.
Totally. Well, even looking back, like her sleep preferences or things like that, like there were little like Easter eggs, if you will, like from the sensory perspective about She was the kid that if the light was on in the room, like she wasn't sleeping, she was staring at the light, or if a sound was too loud on the wrong day, like it was going to bother her. And that was, around like a year, I would say. But again, and why no one really paid too much attention to it, any of this stuff, was she was still functioning. She was still bouncing back, if you will. And so I think that allowed people to say, this is within normal, you
Yeah.
know?
Yeah. And I think if my dream could come true, we get to a place where people become aware enough that when they start seeing this pattern unfold, severe colic, severe reflux, and I see this time and time and time again in the consultations that I have in the families whose children, sadly are much further along and have been impacted more severely.
Mhm.
Thank goodness she is already starting to recover just from the environmental change. But like, I think that this is something so important for everyone to hear that
Mhm.
children with severe colic, like, that's not normal. Children with
No,
severe reflux and dietary intolerances, that's not normal. Those are signs of neuroinflammation, brain inflammation in a little 1 month old, which is not normal. That's a sign of a gastrointestinal tract that's starting to fall apart in a 2 or 3 month old, which is not normal. And
Mhm.
if we see these things, we need to step back as a medical community and as a society and say, what is going on with this child? Because right now, what we're doing is waiting for the train to crash into whatever thing, runaway train that has now gained so much momentum that it's bound to crash, rather than paying attention to the second the brakes start failing in the train. And that
I
is how we bring about change.
Yes, I remember you were the first person that I heard talk about this, say this, and um, naming that what if it's not normal that babies scream all day, you know, all night? What if that's not normal? And I will never forget hearing those words on a podcast that you had been on, and I just stopped in my tracks and I was like, finally, like I feel like I've been gaslighting myself for 3 years, telling myself that all of this was normal. And as a mom, it's not. Like it's not normal for a baby to be in pain that much. And you just hit the nail on the head. Like, what if we stopped calling it normal and started paying attention? Because all of these things, it just rolls from one thing into the next. It doesn't just go away. The baby that screams for hours a day doesn't just stop. The ear infections didn't just stop. The feeding intolerance, it all mattered. And everyone kept telling me that it didn't and that it was okay. And I knew it wasn't.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, if you were to ask me 8 years ago, are these things related or, a concern? I probably would have been someone that would have said, no, I don't think so. I don't think it's a problem.
And I
It's
was saying the same thing to the family. That's probably I was a practitioner standing in the room with the GI physicians as the feeding therapist, just talking about let's make a Band-Aid plan. Like how do we get them to a year? But then I had the families coming back saying, okay, like they're still not eating, like we're off bottles now, but they're still crying and seem uncomfortable and refluxing. And it wasn't until I was a mom living it that I was like, oh, it really doesn't just go away. Like something, it is all related.
yeah,
Um,
yeah,
the story, and you hear the story a lot, right? Like, the, you know, you're at the park now, and I'm like, oh, you lived the same thing that I lived. You hear the kid screaming in the stroller, and it is real.
yeah, yeah. And, how many kids could we help have healthier, brighter lives if we just start paying attention to this? And
Mhm.
this pattern that you described, and I want to just highlight that, if a baby just has colic, that doesn't mean they're going to develop autism, right? I want to make that abundantly clear. But there's a very unique progression where they're colicky, they're super irritable, difficult to console. They start developing reflux to some degree or food intolerances where mom has to cut out gluten, dairy, and X number of foods if they're breastfeeding, or the baby has to be put on a hypoallergenic formula. Then they start developing ear infections. Then they start developing respiratory infections. Then they get a bunch of antibiotics. And, the 15 rounds of antibiotics sadly is not uncommon in many of the families that I see where it's, I mean, some of them get 8 rounds or 6 rounds or 15 or 20 rounds. And in the medical community, we just say, oh, well, some kids just get ear infections. No, no kids, if they get one ear infection in a few years, okay, yeah, my daughter had one ear infection and I had to put her on antibiotics, but that was once in her entire life.
Mhm.
When the pattern deviates, and I think your story is so profound because you're the first that I've seen where a 3 month old had an ear infection, and by the time they were 4 months they had ear tubes placed. Like,
Mhm.
that is something that I think needs to really be highlighted. And these recurrent respiratory issues ending up in the emergency room, recurrent bouts of croup, which is just lung inflammation. And what causes that lung inflammation? Lung inflammation is coming from all of these microbial particulates that are and have been demonstrated in scientific studies to cause massive amounts of inflammation in the airways. So then when you add a virus on top of that, it's like someone was pouring gasoline in the house and all it needed was a match for the entire house to explode. And
Absolutely.
these are the things that we need to be talking about, right? Because it's so important for everyone to see this picture and really understand what is driving it.
Absolutely. And I agree with you of like none of these things were isolated, right? Because I wouldn't have been too worried if it had just been croup or the but I remember as a mom being like all of this that these feel like a thread connecting all of this, but I don't know what to do with it and I don't know what's at the root of it. And so, and to your point, I don't think there's any of course, like maliciousness in it, but I think like I was a provider on the other end of that. It's kind of what you've been trained to think, but knowing that there could be something at the root of it, it could change so much for so many kids.
Yeah. Yeah. What message would you like to have providers and then families hear? If there was one or two messages that you could get into everyone's mind.
I think one, be willing to think outside the box because I know as a provider and a mom, there are conventional ways of treating and thinking about things, and it can feel very woo-woo or like you're going to be face opposition if you think outside the box, but it could literally be the difference in unlocking future for your patients or your child. And you don't want to get to the point where desperation is the thing making you do that. Like, what if we did it as a preventative thing? Um, and I wonder that every day as a mom. And then I guess the other thing is not losing hope, no matter where you are in that journey as a provider or a mom, that I would have told you nothing was going to turn the dial back, but it has, and so I think it's always worth it to keep the hope alive for them because you have to.
We do, and there is hope. I think like that to me, the most powerful part of this is there is hope.
Hmm.
There's an explanation for why things happen. In my book, everything has an explanation. And if I can't come up with it, it doesn't mean the explanation isn't there. It just means I can't come up with it.
Hmm.
But by understanding these things, like how much hope can we bring into the lives of so many families that are no different than where you are,
Hmm.
right?
Oh my goodness, yes. If I had had this message as a mom in the thick of that first year, the difference that that would have made. Because if you're living a version of that story that could lead to this, it is draining the absolute life out of you because it is constant and nonstop, and you are either worrying about why your child is sick or caring for your child who is sick. I mean, it's it's constant.
Yeah. And I think that the beautiful part of this story is all children have so much love in them. All children have so much joy and life in them. And if we can figure out what's keeping them from sharing and bringing that light and joy and energy and vibrancy into the world, and we just take that out of the way, all of this beauty and just life can flow right back in.
Yes, like I think that's the thing that drew me to you as well is like the hope that you are able to hold for kids who on the outside might not look so so full of that life that I believe they all have, but it's in there, and they more than anybody will like that. That's who they are at their core, you know. And so if you can take away those external things, like I'm seeing my little girl again. I mean, months went by, and all I had was videos of the old her, and I'm getting glimpses of her again.
It makes me happy that you're already seeing that, and I can only wait to see how she shows up in the world and in your life. And let's do what we need to get her 100% back.
Let's do it.
Well, thank you for taking the time to share your message. And for all of those people out there who have taken the time to watch this video, thank you for doing that. Please
Mhm.
share this with others. Let's get this message out into the hands of every family,
Mhm.
especially those whose kids are struggling.
Absolutely.
Mhm.
Thank you so much.